Good morning. A little bit early, got another minute or so. And I'm Chris Greenman. I'm here at Alabama State University doing a local artist live for the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts. And I'm sitting here in the ASU sculpture studio, planning to do a little bit of an intro and talk about some pieces, and then I'll do a demo of throwing some bowls. Hey folks, Molly Greenman. Hey Elliot. I can show you a few things while we're warming up here. This is a tea bowl that looks salt-fired, but probably Montgomery unless this was fired down in Florida. So this is what I'm looking at here. So with my tea bowls, I like how tactile they are. I try to throw them so they're not perfectly round. And oftentimes I will pick them up when they're still soft and just kind of give them a slight squeeze so that everybody picks them up, finds that sweet spot, which might not be the same way that I picked the pot up. Everybody's hands are differently. But it's almost like having the experience of shaking my hand. And they're always kind of welcome pieces to pick up. So this was thrown off the hump, and this might have gone into the salt kiln at a studio down in Florida. That's my guess. So that's an older piece. It's 10:02. Let's get started. So my background is I grew up in the North, and my mother was an architect and my father was an engineer. And my mother's parents lived in Troy, New York. We were living in Erie, Pennsylvania, or Boxford, Massachusetts. And we'd go visit my grandparents, and my grandfather collected antiques. He restored the house that he was living in, an old Victorian house. And so he repaired antiques, bought and sold antiques, and then was a photographer, I think mainly for his architectural practice. But he was very interested in photography. So we'd go up there for Christmas and Thanksgiving, and my brother and I would pour through these antique, not so much the antique magazines, but the photography magazines were great because they were from the 1950s. And Life magazine and Saturday Evening Post. So looking through all those, I think it made me image conscious, I think. I guess educating my eye, so to speak. And then certainly looking at the antiques that were in the house and the Oriental rugs. I remember setting up, playing blocks on the Oriental rugs. So being attentive to patterns, I guess, with those rugs was a big influence. And then through high school, I was interested in architecture because my mother was kind of pushing me that way into architecture. And that was fine. I think it taught me a lot. So when I was entering college, I was looking towards architecture, and I ended up with art history. Again, it was that idea of looking at images, looking at paintings, looking at photographs, etc. And then I took 2 years off and went back to New Hampshire. My parents were living in southern New Hampshire at that point. And my mother they were living in a new house that was a fairly new build, which was kind of an odd thing for them. But they were trying something new, because we'd always lived in old houses, old New England houses. and we fixed them up, restored them. And so my mother, I think they were living in that house for a couple of years, and my mother found a house probably about 10 miles away towards the Massachusetts border, an old house. I think it was 1805 or 1810. And that house was going to be burned. The fire department was going to use it as an exercise. And so she worked with a local builder, and we ended up, there was also a rumor that there was Rufus Porter murals in the house. So we went and scraped the paint off, many layers of paint off the walls, and we did find paint underneath. So there were Rufus Porter murals there. So I think I photographed the house and all the details of the house. I don't even think I have those photographs anymore. But anyway, and we took down the Rufus Porter murals. We backed the walls out and braced them up and saved them. And then we took the house down piece by piece, pulling nails, saving nails, straightening nails, or I guess we drilled out the wooden pegs, taking the house down piece by piece, numbering everything, labeling everything. And then we stored the house for 2 years, and then we built it back, which was a really fun, exciting time. So that's a big part of my background. And I didn't do clay until I got back to Penn State as a graduate student, and I was looking at museum studies. But one of the classes I took coming back to graduate school was Ken Beidle's Introduction to Ceramics. And I guess it was oriented more for art education majors, because Beidle was in the art education department, and museum education was in art education. And so the studio was pretty exciting. Beidle taught kind of half Eastern, half Western methods, and wrote a book that was published, I think, after my first or second year there, Zen and the Art of Pottery. And so that pottery class was a major influence. Beidle was just a very influential teacher. I also had him for seminars in the evening, and we'd go and talk about all these great philosophical ideas. So that, coupled with my interest in pottery, was a real powerful thing. And I think in the pottery studio in Clay 1 or Clay 2, there's always this thing about looking at Japanese tea bowls, the whole mystique of Japanese tea bowls. And I remember going to Petit Library at Penn State and poring over and reading about Japanese tea bowls. I don't think I was really trying to make them at the time. I think I was just trying to struggle to learn how to throw. I think I got into tea bowls much later on, but that was always there, I think, in the background. So let's talk about some pieces here. And I've got some pieces on the table here. Turn the camera around. Turn the camera around. There we go. Okay. So I try to do a lot of wood firing. Now, right now, wood firing is not that viable. I know people are wood firing, but or a few places at least I fire, we haven't been doing that. So I'm still kind of making pieces for wood fire. So this is a wood fired piece that was fired up at the University of Montevallo, and it's got a pretty varied surface. It's an interesting piece. Another jar with a lot of texture, and you'll see that texture later, or part of that texture later. Turn it around. I also like looking at abstract expressionist paintings. That was a big influence. And sphere, kind of the carrot in the studio at Penn State was, if you could throw a sphere, you could throw anything. Oh, okay, I'll take that challenge. Some teapots, So these were thrown round, and then I distorted them. Difference here in these two teapots. This is a darker clay body. Darker clay body. And different response with a lighter clay body. And now these are thrown in two pieces. So I think I throw a cylinder up to here, throw another cylinder the same size, and then invert that and turn it upside down on the first one, and then continue throwing. And same thing with this one. These are the same glaze. Now this is on a lighter clay body. This is a Chino glaze on a whiter clay body. And I made it blonder or whiter by oxidizing the firing. And these were fired in a gas kiln. Now this is a darker clay body with that same Chino glaze. And Chino's very responsive to thick and thin. So in glazing both of these pieces, I poured the glaze on and then took a brush and wiped it through the wet glaze, making that pattern. And then coming back with black stain and doing this mark. On the other side, similar. And then this piece, as sometimes happens, kind of fell and kissed another piece, which is creating this mark. So it's kind of an accidental gift from the firing. But same kind of pattern. You can see the brush marks here, and then the black stain. A couple newer pieces, large vase form, kind of working with a process called kuranuki. It's a Japanese process meaning hollowing out. So you put texture on the outside of your mass of clay and then hollow out the inside. Been having some trouble with this. Some clay bodies are really dense and they don't like that. So firing slow, sometimes they still crack. So, and another one, it's a little darker there. Akira Satake also does these. He did a workshop at the Alabama Clay Conference in Montgomery a few years ago. So it's kind of modeled after his idea anyway. A few bisque pieces, taking a darker clay body here and putting a white slip and playing with the texture on the outside. So I'm thinking that's going to have a Nuka glaze on it. Same thing, but adding black stain around it. I like that texture. It's going to be really subtle. A sphere, these pieces are only bisque fired, so they have another firing to go, glaze firing. And I just set out a plate, and I guess it was 2 years ago I was doing demos for the Clay Ones and got an idea of making birds. So these birds were thrown on the wheel. I don't know if you can kind of imagine that, but that's, I'm throwing a vessel on the wheel and then letting it set up till it gets cheese hard or leather hard, and then cutting it and forming it into a bird. So those were fun to do. And, I could talk about these. I set these out. I threw these a couple days ago off the hump T-bowls. And clay looks different at different stages, from wet clay to leather hard. Really wanted these kind of leather hard. They look better at leather hard than bone dry the way they are now. And these are thrown off the hump, and you'll see that in a minute. And then while the clay is still wet, I apply that texture and then push it out from the inside. Then let them set up to leather hard, and then I hold them in my hand. I pick each one up and hold it in my hand and just slightly squeeze it. So I make that impression of my hands feeling the clay. And then a lot of people, and I was certainly taught to finish the rim of your pot while the clay is wet. But for the last few years, I've been letting it set up to leather hard, and after I trim the piece, trim the foot, I come back in with a wooden knife and bevel the edge of the lip, which I think makes for a more comfortable lip. That's my thought anyway. And some other tea bowls. Okay, and these two pieces, I've been doing this with the Clay 1 students and getting them to make Kuranuki pieces. So these were kind of my demo pieces this year for Kuranuki and trying to get the students to stretch a little bit. So each of these was made with 25 pounds of clay, and I took these masses of clay outside and threw them into stones or sewer grates or what have you to get texture. And actually, this happens to be sitting out, so this has been my favorite texture tool right here. It's a broken shovel handle. But you slap it on the clay and it makes all this wonderful, wonderful texture. And so these are made by the hollowing out process. So texturing the outside of the piece and then hollowing out the inside. And then I added a coil of clay to create this rim. And I try to make these lids fit very, very tight. And I've got to go back and sand those. And this is what I hollow it out with, or at least starting with. Okay, so we're going to go over to the other side, to ceramics. And we're going to throw some bowls. So, let's see here. Well, you don't want to look at that, so there we go. There we go. Okay, so I'm still here. All right. So I have centered this clay. This is about 12 pounds of clay. So I should be able to get 10 or 12 bowls out of this. So the first bowl I'm going to throw is just going to be pretty straightforward bowl. All right, hopefully that sound's not too distracting. And I can't really see questions. I don't know if anyone's asked questions yet. So hopefully I'm not missing those. All right. So I've created this fixed quantity here. So that's the mass that I'm going to be using for making these bowls, or this bowl. So I'm driving my thumbs into the clay. It's nice soft clay. And my thumbs are going to go away from me towards the outside wall. And I'm just making that rim starting to undulate a little bit. And that's only preliminary. So I'll go back in and pull these walls up. A lot of variations you could do. So I'm pulling them up at compass points. And then I'm going to choke it in. It's going to be a fairly big bowl. I guess I was going to do a standard bowl first. I didn't. Okay. And then I'm going to bring that clay up. So I'm thinning that wall out. Now, because I messed up the wall on purpose, it's kind of like skiing over moguls. My fingers going over that clay. So I'm really not trying to correct it too much, although throwing the wall up and bringing those walls up will kind of correct the unevenness. And again, I throw these as T-bowls, but probably most people are going to use them as bourbon bowls or something like that. All right, now I'm going to take my rib and smooth that surface. Oh, it's not round now. And this is a tool I made from a pencil sharpener blade. And makes a really nice texture. If you can see the texture. It's kind of like you could do the same thing with a screw. You could do the same thing with pieces of rope. It makes a continuous texture, which is really nice. And then when you put glazes over it, it's going to slightly obscure it. Another thing I play with is putting that texture on and then taking a colored slip, like a red slip or black slip, and painting that on top, and then going back and taking another rib. You can see the notch that I created in that rib, and then I can draw through that texture. It's kind of spontaneous. Yeah. And then I'll push it out from the inside. And of course, I can't touch the outside now. So I like the idea of, setting that texture there, distorting the form, correcting the form, and seeing what I get. That one came out that's pretty low there. And then I'll work to get it off. When you're throwing off the hump, or when you're throwing even off the wheel head, I always tell students to grow from each pot, to learn from each pot. So you take that pot and you look at it and you say, okay, well, did that. Okay, what else can I do? And so that leads, for me, it leads to more improvisation. But I'm going to throw another straight bowl, which I meant to do with the first bowl. Let's see what time we're getting at. So this throwing off the hump allows you to wedge up a mass of clay, 15 pounds here, or 12 pounds, I guess, and then section off areas. It's really good for throwing bowls. You can also use it for throwing mugs. It's a little bit more difficult, a little bit more tedious. So I'm going to make soup bowl, noodles bowl. Probably a bowl that I'd make for my demos for Clay 1. Every move kind of approximates the form, gets it closer to the final form. See a question. Let's see, this is okay. It's hard to see questions. I'm just packing the rim here. I'm going to bring that form out a little bit. thin rib is fine. I just always go back in, and I like to feel the surface and leave marks in the surface with my fingers. So typically, if you look at the bottom of my pieces, tea bowls or mugs, you'll see a spiral. And that's not unique to me. So here's another tea bowl size soup bowl. And we'll throw another tea bowl. And I'm sorry if this sound is too loud. This is an old Brent wheel. We've been here since the 70s, I'm guessing. Seems like potter's wheels are made extremely well, durable. I see a lot of people online, new potters, and they want to get the cheapest wheel. And I think you can get one. I've seen people advertise them on Walmart or something. For a wheel for it's like $150. Don't get it. If you're gonna buy a wheel, I recommend getting. You're gonna spend $1,000 or so, but get a wheel that's gonna last, and it will last. And they don't lose value that much. But you want to get something that's gonna work. Oops, I didn't do that, did I? I'm thinking here. I want to get that rim to start undulating a little bit. Okay. There is no right way. Some of the Japanese artists I look at are Shio Kanzaki, more traditional potter. He's passed in the last couple of years. Suzuki Goro, look at him a lot. Suzuki Goro, he was a young potter, and he set a goal of making 1,000 pots a day, and he was like in his teens. And he ended up surpassing that. I think he made it to like 1,200 pots a day. That's insane. But I think it gave him an incredible physical range, but also it allowed him to be very spontaneous. So he's probably the freest potter I can think of, where there are no rules. That's a big influence. Ken Matsuzaki is another big influence. Okay. See if there are any questions. It's hard to see the questions. It's really hard to see questions, sorry. So using the rib on the outside just gives me a smooth surface to start from. And then I go back in with my favorite tool. What else can you do here? There are no rules. Whoops. All right, so let's see what happens now. So again, these will be allowed to set up to leather hard. Before they get leather hard, I will pick up each one, and then the bottoms will get trimmed. And then I will carve the rim using, just a wooden knife. It's the Korean-made wooden knife. I'm going to push that out just a little bit more. Okay. And we're going to take this off. And there we go. This is a little bit more subtle, that rim is. Okay. Okay, we're a little bit over time, so I'm gonna wash my hands and turn the camera off. Okay, thank you. Thank you for hosting me, Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts. And thanks everybody for joining me this morning. All right. All right, thank you very much.